Our next panel will discuss violence in global cities. What humane strategies are cities using to address the root causes of violence? To explore this challenge, please welcome your moderator, Jamil Anderlini, Asia editor, Financial Times, former Minister of Constitutional Development in South Africa, Roelf Meyer, former Mayor of Medellín, Sergio Fajardo, Evelyn Diaz of Heartland Alliance, and Philippe, the Mayor of Brussels.
Thank you very much. I'd just really like to thank Audrey for that really powerful flash talk just then. I thought that was very brilliantly done by her. So each of the people on this stage comes from a place that is associated with high rates of violent crime. But each of these places is also associated with some positive success stories when it comes to dealing with high rates of violence. This is my fourth year coming to moderate at this conference, and it's interesting to me. One of my colleagues who's based here likes to refer to Chicago as Chirac, and there's obviously it has a reputation here for being a city with very high rates of gun crime in particular. But I have to say, and I think it is quite telling that I always stay in the downtown area, and I've never even seen someone raise their voice. I mean, for me, it's fascinating how this city can have this reputation, but how localized these violent incidents are. That it's not the downtown part of Chicago where you see this. So I'd like, first of all, Evelyn to tell us a little bit, since we're here in Chicago, tell us a little bit about the situation in the city, and then talk a little bit about the programs that you're working on to tackle violence here in Chicago.
Sure, thanks. And I'm really honored to be on this stage with mayors and former mayors and dignitaries, and as kind of the sole social services provider. But I did work for two mayors and two administrations on this issue of violence, and we had to kind of deal with this reputation that we have as being a particularly violent city. So our problem is around gun violence. And we are neither kind of at the highest rate we've ever been. In fact, we've cut our rate of gun violence in half since the 1990s. And we're also not the most violent city in the United States. There are cities like St. Louis and Baltimore and Detroit that have much higher homicide rates than Chicago. But where we are kind of wringing our hands and are most concerned and feel the most sense of urgency is the fact that we're trending in the wrong direction. Historically, Chicago has tracked with New York City and LA in terms of our homicide rates. And while those two cities have decreased their gun violence 90% and 75% respectively, we've been heading in a different direction. And so today we find ourselves looking at the disparity between Chicago and New York and Los Angeles, and realizing that we're at this really important juncture where we could, if we can reverse our violence rate, go the way of large growing global cities, or we could find ourselves going in the way of cities that are in economic decline. So that's really important. But then there's the human impact and the toll that it's taking on our families in very concentrated areas, but spread across the city. We've been losing population. We've had to close public schools. We are seeing really alarming rates of PTSD in the populations that we're serving. And so we're really feeling a sense of urgency and asking ourselves, what is it going to take? What do we have to do differently than we've ever done before to be able to bring our violence rate down 90%, 75%? So in the midst of that, in 2016, we reached our most recent high water mark. We had roughly 770 homicides that year. And my organization, Heartland Alliance, which is a human rights organization that's been in Chicago for 130 years, we got together with the University of Chicago Crime Lab, and we got together with 6 community organizations. The crime lab had this to offer. They said, we've got predictive analytics that can tell us who the people are in the city who are at the very highest risk of being involved in gun violence. We have street-level intelligence telling us where violence is going to break out at any given moment. Could we use that to go find people, knock on their doors, begin to develop a trusting relationship with them and offer them something else, offer them a job, offer them cognitive behavioral therapy, life coaching, and see if that reduces violence? And so we began that experiment in 2016. We've been running the program now for 2 years. We envision it being a 4-year program serving ultimately 1,000 people. So at the midpoint, we've just exceeded 500 men in the program. We're learning a lot about them. But I think what makes this project unique is that we're using data in ways, new ways to see if we can kind of hyper-target our interventions. We're testing those interventions rigorously to see if they really have the impact we're hoping that they have. And we're taking a different approach to violence reduction. We're saying it's not about law enforcement, maybe it's about relationship building and seeing the humanity in people and seeing if we can turn it around through relationships.
It's fascinating. So, Mayor of Brussels, Philippe, Belgium has had more young men travel to join ISIS in Syria and Iraq than any other European country. And some of the neighborhoods in your city have become really synonymous with violent radicalization. Why do you think that is, and what have you been doing since you became mayor a couple of years ago to tackle this?
First of all, a little bit of history, because we are very surprising when we heard at the first time that so many young people want to go to Iraq or Syria to serve ISIS Khalifa. Let me just say a few words about what Brussels becomes. Brussels is now one of the most cosmopolitan cities of the world, just after Dubai. There are more than 184 nationalities who live in Brussels every day, who work together in the same neighborhood. There are a lot of things to do to manage the old people coming all around the world. We are the headquarters from NATO, the headquarters of the European Commission. We are the capital of 500 million European citizens. And just after 2013, we are a sort of dream, because the criminality is very low. For a city of 1.2 million inhabitants, there are 50 homicides by year. It's too much, but it's only 50 if you compare with other big cities. And then when I heard for the first time in 2013 that people choose to go in Syria or Iraq, we don't believe it. Because these people who grew up on our territory, who are at the same school that other children, they learn with our teacher. And then we don't understand what happens. And we tried to manage this in 2013, and everyone knows what happens in Paris and Brussels in 2015 and 2016. It was a shock. That is the same terrorist team. They do Paris terror attack and Brussels terror attack. And that people don't come from foreign country, but they grow in own country, in our city. And then we decide to create a cell for prevention and countering violent extremism. The goal, the core business of these cells, the first goal is to share information between the different services, because we know that's not easy for a social worker to work with police department. It's very difficult to say as a social worker that it's important to work with local police department and federal police department. It's always difficult for a teacher, for director of school, to speak with intelligence services, because it is not the same job. And with the integrated cells, local security cell, and the chairman is the mayor, I'm the chairman of this cell, we can put the people together. Every service has not the same reality, that's not the same goal, but we can exchange and sharing information. That's the first intervention that we do together. But what I want to say also, and what we learn about that, first of all, it's learn about the situation. Learn what happens with these young people who grow in the same school that other one. Why they decide to become terrorists. Now we have another challenge, is what we call the foreign terrorist fighter, and all the homegrown terrorist fighters who come back, and the returnees, we call that the returnees, who wants to come back home. But also what I want to say, if you want to manage security, as you say, if you want to manage the criminality, if you only invest in police departments, it doesn't work. You need to invest in another city project, in health, in social project, in school, and also to prevent all what it happens. And what we try to do with this cell about the prevention and the prevention about the violent extremism is to help the professional to find a way to cure this real great problem in Europe. Because if we don't do it, we know that now ISIS is maybe beaten, but we know also that it's always a place for other extremists, violent extremists. See what it happens, for example, in New Zealand with the white supremacists. Sorry, but it's the same process that the people try to do something, someone alone. What we are very afraid is about what we call the lone wolf, that not with an organization we support the lone wolf. There's people with problem of mental disease who decide to do an act, a terror attack, and an act to show at the society that they exist. And what we try to do with this cell is, I repeat, sharing information, but also finding solutions for disengagement and de-radicalization.
I would point out that the person in New Zealand was from Australia, but yeah. Sergio, Medellin was once regarded as one of the really most dangerous places on the planet. But between 1991 and 2014, it saw a decline, again, in violence of around 90%. So can you tell us a little bit how that was achieved? You were mayor for some of that time, and I know you have some slides as well.
I do. Let's see. Yeah. I prepare some slides. I'm a professor, and I prepare some. I come from Medellin, from Colombia, an extraordinary city, a wonderful country, but I'm not invited here because the wonderful things that we have, but because we had a problem. We still have, and we have gone through difficult situations. Currently professor at the Tecnológico of Monterrey. And I'm going to explain you a few things. It's a picture of Medellin, one of the difficult parts that we have there. And here I want to explain the first thing. When we came to power, we are a civic independent political movement. For the first time, we defeated the traditional political parties in the city of Medellin, and we were facing three problems: inequality, violence, and the culture of illegality and corruption. Most people see those as problems which are different. They may look different from the outside, but if you look below the earth, then you will see that the end, after many years, they have a common root. And then you have to work on the three of them simultaneously. It wouldn't work just one by one. Very basic thing. Now I want to explain about a word that everywhere is mentioned today, which is inequality. And I have a very simple way of explaining inequality, which will help us to understand many things, and it may work for you and for many places. For most people in Medellin, in Colombia, Latin America, when the kids, young people come out of their homes, they sit on the street, at the corner of the street where they live, they look in front and they will see a huge wall in front. That's the wall of inequality. They know what's beyond the wall, but they see no way in order to get there. And that's what inequality produces. It has a very negative effect in most people. By the side of that wall, there is an entrance door to the illegality world, criminal world. So most kids are facing there and said, where do I go? I would like to go beyond the wall where the opportunities are, but most of them, they see no path in order to get there. And that's the dangerous situation, and we have to handle that problem. Let's see. And this is a picture I have. This is a game that kids played in Medellin. We made this bill. But for most people in Medellin, Colombia, Latin America, that's what their lives are going to be. They try to climb. There is no way they are going to move to the other side. So what we have to do is tear the wall down. There should be no walls in the world. But that we cannot do right now. What we can do is make the entrance door to the illegality world narrower and begin opening up doors through the wall so that they could lead to the opportunities. And so that the guy who is in front, they start seeing a path that they can follow instead of just being a wall and the illegal wall in front. That's where we work, and that's what we have been doing, and I'll explain you very little. Here is the entrance door. Don't worry about the graphic that I have in there, but you have to understand what happens once a person comes into the illegal world. That's inside. It's a terrible world. Most people would come out dead. That's what happens. I'm going to look at the entrance door. And you have to locate and understand the problems, understanding the territory where you are. So that's right at the entrance. People who have been they are just moving inside. You have to work with them. Don't give up on those kids who are just moving into the criminal world. And outside, you can and you have to locate those vulnerable kids, vulnerable youth, and understand what is happening everywhere. For most kids, the key word is they don't have a life project, and we have to build a life project with them. I have many of the reasons why they are vulnerable. They have been living, for example, for years in a community where violence has been a daily issue in their lives, and you have to work on that. But, and here is a crucial thing that we have to do, and with this I will finish to explain things, and then we can talk. We usually concentrate on the youth that are about to get in. That we have to do that, of course. We have plenty of programs. Prevention is better, protective environments, and youth with a future. And of course, every kid who is about to enter into the criminal world, they should be in school. A 16-year-old anywhere in this planet should be in school. It doesn't work, or what's happening in school requires special attention. We have done a lot of that. But you have to work with the community where they live, not just the kids who are about to get in there. That's what happens most of the time. Worry about the kids that we have to do. But if you don't think about the community, beginning with their families, you are going to get no solution. You have to work with the community. You have to empower those communities. We have plenty of programs. In Medellin, we came with the social urbanist program that attended the conditions, the physical conditions associated, attached to every social program that we could bring in there, but the community should be also part of the transition. And not only the community, but the whole society. You have to take into account the three factors: the youth, the community, all of us in the society, understanding with different programs what it means to be transparent, legality, citizens' culture, and coexistence. If you put those three things together, you are going to improve quite a lot. But you have to work on both in those three dimensions in order to get things done. We have done it. It works. We have to keep it through time. But understanding that is very powerful. And my claim is that this has to do not only with Medellin, it has to do with Chicago, Brussels, all over the world. After all, what we are facing are walls. And you have to understand what are the type of walls that you have. And understanding that, I'm sure a solution like this would work in most places. And that's, we are building opportunities, but you have to solve a very difficult problem and understand it in all its dimensions.
Thank you very much. So, Roelf, the end of apartheid was accompanied by violent upheaval, obviously, but ultimately it didn't descend into widespread bloodletting, and you were there, you were part of this process. What are some of the lessons from South Africa's experience in sort of stopping that very bad spread of, real upheaval? I mean, crime's still not great in South Africa, but at least it wasn't, genocide.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. After Mandela was released in the beginning of 1990, there was a huge increase in political violence in the country. It was as if, the closed doors were opened on the political scene, and communities started to interact in a vicious way with each other. So there there was a huge increase in this political violence, leading to more killings in that period that followed his release than ever previously, prior to that. And the political leadership, Mandela, de Klerk, and others, could not contain the situation, and it went on for about 2 years. And then civil society, and I think this is where it's good that I can link on to what Sergio was just saying. Then civil society started to interact. And it was specifically Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who took the lead and said, we must stop this. And he started to help us as politicians and others, to bring us together to negotiate what was called a peace accord for the country as a whole. But that led to the establishment of peace committees in each town and township around the country. And these peace committees were made up of representatives from the different communities and other actors. For instance, for the first time, police station commanders had to sit at the same table as the activists. They never thought it would happen. But they did so because there was this moral demand from the civil society and the religious leaders. And it happened. And they started to work together in each community around the country, in each township, and formed these peace committees where grievances were addressed and in the end successfully, jointly. And I think that's the key, jointly then addressed.
Can I just ask, I'll let you continue in a second, but are you, when you have your cell that you're talking about, do you have religious leaders from the Muslim community in that room and as part of that group?
Not directly in that group, but we have a lot of contact with the Muslim community. In Belgium, you need to know that there are a lot of Muslim people who are in the parliament, minister, deputy mayor in other municipality. And the contact between the different community is very open. It is why we are so surprising in 2013, because we have the dream that our society is so open that never happens in Brussels and in Belgium in particular. And during a few years, we heard about this radicalism, and we say, yeah, but it's not for our country. And when we discovered that for the terror attack in Paris was organized in Brussels, just 1 kilometer from the center of Brussels, from the Grand Place of Brussels, we are so disappointed, not disappointed, but that's for us very a shock. And it's really important to work with all the community. And in the case of Brussels, they are among 20% of the population of Brussels was Muslim. They are really open to work and to collaborate with the authority. They are really aware about what it happens. But it's very difficult for the parents, for example, because a lot of parents don't understand what it happens with the son or the daughter who wants to leave Brussels, who wants to leave Belgium for Iraq or for Syria. And one of the goals of this cell is to help the parents and help the children to choose another way. And I'm really convinced that what my colleague says about the future for the youth people, if you don't have a future for the evening or for the day after, you have nothing to do. And then you choose another way of life, another meaning of your life. And I think for the radicalization is another thing that for the crime unit or for the gang in the city, that's another, because in the radicalization, in particular for Islamic radicalization, they are aware about the intellectual. They learn about the Quran, they learn about the religion, and they have the feeling that they do something else in this life. It's not like for a crime.
Gives them some meaning. And many of them were involved in petty crime before they became radicalized.
Yeah, and
this was almost their way out.
And this is one of the biggest problems now is what happens in the jail, for example.
Right.
Because for the last terror attack in Liège, it's just a city in the area of Brussels, it's people who are radicalized in the jail,
in prison,
during this prison.
Sorry, I wanted to allow you to continue.
Thanks. Now, what I was going to say is that I think there were 3 reasons why we were successful with these peace committees. The one is it was inclusive, and that was rare at that stage. You can imagine during apartheid it was very authoritarian, exclusive, nationalistic. And the whole idea of becoming inclusive, bringing in communities that have never been talked to before, was quite exceptional for us at that stage, but it worked. The second reason is people started to take responsibility and ownership of their being, where they are, and also to try and find answers to improve their situation. And the third one was people, by sitting across the table, former enemies, sitting across the table, knew there was only one way forward, and that is that they had to build trust in each other. So those three factors became very strong drivers of making this a successful experience. Now, one can say that was history, it's 25, 30 years ago. But in the meantime, we have started to transfer some of these experiences to other parts of the world where there's conflict. And the most recent one, where I am directly involved with some other South Africans, is Myanmar, or Burma, as some would know it. We can talk about that because what we are doing there is taking this example of the Peace Committee's experience of South Africa to the communities in the Rakhine State. Now, you will remember that is where all the problems started 3 years ago with the Rohingya Muslims. And what we have succeeded so far in doing is to get communities in the northern Rakhine State to start to talk to each other, Rohingya Muslim and Rakhine. People originally thought it's impossible. Now we have them working together in a joint committee in the township of Mongdao. And I've seen it myself. I was there, and it shows it can work.
I'm quite interested in something that you've talked about, Evelyn, which is the use of technology and big data to identify criminal clusters, I guess. And in the special report that we published yesterday, there's an article which looks at this public health approach to violence and this idea of treating violent outbreaks like you would disease outbreaks. And so intervening and quarantining and dealing with it so in the same way that you would with an infectious disease. Is that something that that you're looking at and using? You said using technology, and how exactly are you doing that?
So I'll just say the city has said that they see the problem as a public health problem.
Right.
I don't know that we've done a really good job of putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak. Or a more generous interpretation is like we've been trying to figure it out. I think our last mayor did a really great job of putting a lot of investment into prevention programs to try to get kids well before they could start entering this cycle. Where as a city, I think we're only just now really starting to invest is on the intervention, where you go right at the problem, addressing the individuals who have already gotten into this system, right, and the criminal justice system. Our program, and I want to underscore what is so unique about this program, is that there are lots of nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations that are working on the violence problem. We are not the only one by far. But using the data, we really have been able to identify people who we now know are in the 94th risk of, or percentile of risk in the city. And what that looks like is that on average, remember we're serving about 500 guys, on average they have 12 arrests, 4 felony convictions, 2 gun cases. 80% of them have lost a family member to gun violence. About almost 50% of them have children. And what happens to them is going to influence their children and future generations. So we really are targeting this very high-risk population that nobody invests in. These are the guys who we expect are going to end up dead or continue cycling through jail. We said, let's use that data, let's find them and offer them a different opportunity, right? To open a different door. They've only had one door open and available to them. They've been kind of cycling through that. And so I think now, and our new mayor has really kind of doubled down on this idea of approaching our violence problem as a public health problem, about addressing root causes, about addressing income disparities, poverty, trauma in communities as part of the approach to reducing violence in the city. So I think we're kind of slowly getting to a place where we actually are really kind of, from an execution standpoint, treating violence as a public health epidemic.
So some of the solutions people have talked about involve better surveillance, better interventions. As you're saying, you're identifying individuals actually. Mm-hmm. And I've spent the last 20 years living in China, and China has very, very low rates of violence, but that's because there are no privacy laws. It's a police state where the government is watching everything all the time. Where's the line? I mean, it's a tough question, right? So for you, going into communities and identifying the families of potential terrorists, but and it's a civil liberties issue as well. And how do we do that? And I just ask you briefly, because we want to get to some Q&A, but where is the line and how do you manage that balance?
The balance is very important because the human right is defined our model of society model. And what I explained about this collaboration between the police department and social workers is very, very difficult to manage. And I understand that because the social worker doesn't want to be just a collaborator of the police department. Yeah. It's why we create this cell where the place when everyone can speak frankly, honestly about the situation and decide to don't say something. If they decide to say something, it's okay. If they decide to don't say, but there are always a place when everybody can say something about the situation. And also there's a place where the parents of the person who's in phase of radicalization can find someone to speak. It's very, really important. But I agree with you, and it's very important that the terror attack and the terrorism can change all our rules of society. It's always very difficult to manage. If we do only a policy about criminality and we forget what we have there for the city, for the project of the city, social, health, school, we lose this fight against criminality because we change the model. Mm-hmm. It's why with this problem of terrorism in Europe, we are convinced that to show what is the good model for the society, to show what is the future for the youth people, is also important that the fight against terrorism. As you say, as Sergio says, that if you don't show at the people, at the young people, that it's possible to climb the wall and to see what is outside the wall, and in particular in Brussels, the poor neighborhood in Brussels is in the center of the city, is downtown. It's not like in France in the neighborhood. Is it in the city? Molenbeek, that everyone know what's Molenbeek, is just 1 kilometer from the Grand Place from Brussels. There are contact between the different communities. And this city project is, for me, very, very important. And the balance between human rights and security is very, very important to find it.
I may add something, which is our problem is different. We have had it, let's say, since narco-traffic came into our society, and we became known because narco-traffic coming from Colombia. It has been almost 40 years. So the roots are very deep down, and of course the problem is far more difficult. Mm-hmm. So you can, let's put it this word, and I think you understand it, learn from the problem that we have so that you don't get those roots that far down. And there are many experiences that we can share. Now, then you get into this criminal world and you have successes in the sense that you are capturing guys who are involved with the crime, mostly narco-traffickers, say. For example, I think about Mexico. I have a colleague here from the Tecnológico of Monterrey, where you are capturing and capturing and capturing. But for each one that you capture, you will have 3 who are coming in. You are never going to stop. It may be popular to capture because it shows you are strong, but then you are not going to solve that problem. But there's no way you are going to solve the problem if you don't understand that entrance door, which is far more difficult to deal that the case where you are fighting criminals, which everyone is against them. Nobody will support someone who has that behavior. So the balance should be in there. And actually, I'll talk about Colombia. policemen are the ones who really know what's happening with the kids in the streets, because they are the ones who are in the streets, and they have seen it. They see what is happening with their families, the relationships that they have, what happens in the school. So there should be, and we have had some successes, we still have a long way to go, but the way that police interacts, which you say is difficult, because you are just at the beginning, it was something that shocks you without knowing. But we have had this for years, and a police force who can interact with the social programs, and they are very much interested. Of course, there are bad cases, bad situations, but that's important to understand both worlds simultaneously. Now, you have to persevere. This takes time. We can talk about persevering 40 years in this struggle, but we are improving. It's costful. It costs, but it can be done.
Okay, I want to give a chance to the audience to ask a question or two. There's a gentleman here in the middle.
Hi, Thomas Abt. When we approach these very difficult issues of urban violence, organized criminal violence, political violence, terrorism, we always come to them with our prior beliefs and our prior values. And one of the things I see, both in the United States and abroad, is those priors often interfere with sort of a problem-solving approach. And so we often fall into one of two camps. We are deeply committed to prevention-oriented approaches, or we are deeply committed to enforcement-oriented approaches, when in fact, the empirical evidence is basically in agreement that you need both. How do we address this polarization and get people on both sides to work together, recognizing that we need law enforcement, but we also need tertiary, secondary, and primary prevention?
That's a question without a clear answer, I guess. But I totally agree, it has to be both. And I think this is not only in the question of city or in metropolitan areas, it's also nationally. It's all about crime prevention, peacekeeping, etc. at different levels. But I would like to add to one point which Jamil asked about, and that is, how do we address this? I think it's a question of following the most democratic route we can. Following the most democratic route we can. Because I come from an experience where we applied autocracy, authoritarian rule, and I saw the damage over decades, over centuries that brought. And the problem with autocracy or authoritarian rule is that it's based on exclusion. And if people feel excluded, it might be a minority, it might be a majority that are excluded. But if people feel they're excluded, they're going to fight against it. And so I think the answer lies in both answers that you've given.
Can I offer just a thought on this? I think part of it, Thomas, is we have a scarcity mentality when it comes to violence that doesn't exist when we're trying to solve other, when Ebola hits, there's nobody saying, let's not fund this piece of it, let's just fund this piece of our response. There's a commitment to doing whatever it takes for however long and however much it's going to cost to solving that problem. But when it comes to violence, we make these trade-offs. We have this conversation about this is cheaper, faster, the data tells us this might work more, so let's put all of our money here and not over here. And I think it's why it feels like we've been kind of chasing the solution, is because we've been unwilling to say we have to do both of them, we have to fund them fully, and we have to stick with it for a long time, as Mayor Fajardo said, until we see the results. And so getting ourselves out of a scarcity mindset and recognizing that this public this public health crisis isn't less than any other public health crisis that matters in our world.
The reason I'm here as a politician, I am a mathematician. Actually, I got my PhD very close to here from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, in logic. And thank you, I'm a Badger.
That's a compliment.
But because after many years, we understood something that is very simple, but is very deep, which is politicians are the ones who make the most important decisions in our society, whether we like them or not. And we need politicians that understand things, politicians that pay attention to rigorous work, to studies, so that we can understand that it's not just one or the other, but understand the complexity of the problem and understand the complexity of the solution, but know something that we mathematicians do, which is we go step by step. Every step that we take, we are improving. You have to tell people that we are improving, and the next step, we are getting closer to where we want to go. But that's part of politics, showing people that there is a path, and then we talk about hope. When you see that you are improving, that you can do something, and then you can do something and better, then society transforms itself. If you are just waiting for having these results immediately, you are going to be lost, and then you have to intervene in both fronts. And I think politicians, we have to have better politicians, we have to take part in politics, and we have to change politics.
We're out of time, I'm afraid, but I think we can leave on that note. We need better politicians. I think most people in the room or in this country can probably agree with that. Thank you so much to my excellent panel.
Thank you.